My name is Paige Blake. I was supposed to die at the reunion dinner." My own mother smiled at me while handing me a poisoned glass of wine, then calmly told my father I was never a daughter, just a liability. That was the moment I realized they weren't just cruel, they were done pretending. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't the same girl they exiled over a decade ago. I was no longer Paige Vance, the obedient daughter. I was CIA trained, forged by betrayal, sharpened by survival. That night they didn't eliminate a problem, they started a war. And I was done being silent. Before we dive into how I turned the Vance empire to ash, I have a question. Where are you watching from? And how old were you when someone in your family tried to silence your worth? Don't forget to subscribe to Subtle Revenge Stories for more powerful stories like this. She was never a daughter, Sterling. She was a liability. Those words were the first thing I heard after 10 years away from home. My mother didn't whisper them. She looked me square in the eye, turned to my father, and said it like she was talking about a financial write-off, not a person. Not her own child. The room went quiet. Even the chandelier above us seemed to freeze in place. That night wasn't meant to be a homecoming. It was an execution dressed up as a reunion dinner. I hadn't seen my family since I left Atherton at 16. A part of me hoped that coming back would feel like closure. That maybe I had imagined some of the coldness exaggerated their cruelty. But the moment I stepped into the Vance estate, the same mansion where I used to count the seconds before being dismissed from the dinner table, I knew nothing had changed. The air was the same, heavy with wealth, tradition, and quiet brutality. The marble floor chilled my feet through my shoes. It was like walking into a mausoleum. I spotted Mrs. Gable first, our housekeeper, the only soul in that home who ever treated me like I was human. She looked older, smaller somehow, but her eyes met mine with the same warmth I remembered. She gave a small shake of her head, almost imperceptible, and lowered her gaze. That one gesture told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't safe. Not here. Not with them. Then came Eleanor. My mother. Her embrace was all appearance, no substance. Her hands rested on my shoulders like a sculptor appraising flawed marble. "Paige," she said, her voice like pressed linen, smooth and stiff. Her perfume hit me before her words did, strong, curated, expensive. She stepped back, gave me a once-over, and said, "You look hardened. There's something wild about you." It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. To her, I had become unrecognizable. A threat. Something uncontained. She led me into the dining room as if escorting a guest to a funeral. The long mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier that had seen more champagne than warmth. My father was already seated, talking about a new Pentagon deal, his voice steady and shallow like the clink of silverware. My brother Julian wasn't even there yet. They spoke about him as if he were royalty, his accomplishments displayed like trophies on invisible shelves. And me, I was the afterthought. "Still happy with your administrative work?" my father asked, eyes somewhere near his plate. "It's fulfilling," I lied, feeling the heat rise in my chest. Eleanor gave a dismissive laugh and said, "Well, at least it keeps you busy." They weren't curious about my life. They wanted to keep me small. And that's when it hit me I hadn't come home. I had entered enemy territory. So tell me, have you ever walked into a room full of people who share your blood, but you still had to remind yourself to breathe? What did you do in that moment? Let me know below. And don't go anywhere, the dinner hadn't even begun. The dinner itself was everything I remembered, lavish, cold, and painfully performative. The table was set for 6, though only 3 of us sat there. My mother had arranged it like a photo shoot, crystal glasses, perfectly aligned silver utensils, polished to a mirror finish, and fine bone china waiting like a trap. There was no warmth in the food, only wealth. The beef was Kobe the asparagus imported, and the wine, a 2014 Opus 1, poured like liquid royalty. But for all its elegance, it felt like a final meal. I watched Eleanor carefully as she uncorked the wine. Her hands moved with grace, too much grace. Something in me stirred. My training didn't scream, it whispered, but the tone was sharp and deliberate. She poured for herself, then Sterling, then me. "To your return," she said, holding up her glass with that flawless smile she reserved for public galas and corporate photographers. I looked at the deep red swirl in my glass. A shade too dark. A swirl too heavy. I raised it, pretending to toast, then took a sip, barely a taste. That was all I needed. The metallic tang was faint, but unmistakable. Not wine. Not oak or age. Metal. My throat tingled as the warmth slid lower than it should have. It wasn't alcohol, it was a calculated blend, slow-acting clean. I'd studied poisons like this at the farm, the CIA's training ground. It was designed to mimic cardiac failure, an elegant exit that left no traces. My vision started to blur, not from the wine, but from the surge of adrenaline now pumping through me like fire. Eleanor kept smiling. She didn't even blink. Sterling kept talking about contracts and global strategy, unaware, or maybe completely aware of what was happening. I blinked, trying to focus on their voices. Then I heard it. Clear, cutting through the haze like ice water. "She was never a daughter," Sterling, my mother said, placing her glass down with precision. "She was a liability, a mistake we failed to contain." My father didn't argue. He just stared at the table, nodded once, and said nothing. That silence told me everything. I was a problem they had finally decided to solve. My limbs began to give out. I slumped forward, brushing my glass with my wrist. The wine spilled like blood across the white linen, a stain too vivid to ignore. But even as the darkness pulled at me, I stayed conscious, barely. I saw my mother slowly reach into her clutch and pull out white satin gloves, the kind she wore to charity events. She began slipping them on, not in panic, not in concern, but with ceremony. She was preparing to clean up. That was when I realized this wasn't an emotional decision. This was a protocol. I was being liquidated. Let me ask you something. If the people who raised you looked you in the eye and decided you no longer deserved to live, how would you respond? Would you fight to be seen or vanish so they'd never see you coming? The moment my body hit the floor, I let go deliberately, not of consciousness, but of resistance. I allowed myself to collapse forward like a puppet with its strings cut just enough to sell the illusion. My cheek rested against the cold marble tile beneath the table. I could hear the soft rustle of my mother's dress as she stood, graceful even in betrayal. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, not from fear but calculation. Every second was measured, every breath rationed. My training had taught me how to slow everything down in moments of crisis. Threat assessment, neutralize environment, survive, counterattack. I heard her heels move slowly around the table. "Is she breathing?" Sterling's voice flat as ever. No panic, no emotion. Shallowly, Eleanor replied, as if reporting on a malfunctioning appliance. "She won't make it past midnight." The detachment in her voice chilled me more than the poison. They weren't afraid. They were confident. That was their weakness. Time blurred. When I next opened my eyes, I wasn't in the dining room anymore. The cold was different now, damp, musty. I was lying on stone, surrounded by silence so thick it pressed against my chest. The wine cellar, of course. Out of sight, out of mind. They didn't want a scene. They didn't want scandal. They wanted a quiet disappearance. A footnote. Troubled daughter returns, flees after breakdown. I could practically hear the headlines they were crafting. They thought it was done. But they forgot who I became after they threw me out. I took a mental inventory. No phone, no shoes, jewelry removed. My belt was gone. They'd stripped me of anything I could use as a weapon, all except one thing. I moved my head slightly and caught a glint beside me on an old wooden crate. It was small, delicate, out of place. A butterfly-shaped hair clip. My hair clip. It must have fallen from my head while they dragged me down here. They missed it. They were arrogant. I shifted my body slowly, carefully. The toxin was still in me, slowing my reflexes, but my mind was beginning to clear. With enough grit and timing, I could use that clip. I'd been trained to open handcuffs with a toothpick. I'd escaped a compound in Yemen using only a matchbook and a broken zipper. This was almost generous. I began working on the rusted lock on the service door, the clip trembling slightly in my fingers. And as I did, a thought came to me. They thought they had finished the story. That the difficult daughter had finally been removed. What they didn't realize was that they hadn't ended a problem. They had activated something far more dangerous. They had summoned a war. So let me ask you, if someone tried to erase you like a typo in their legacy, would you let them write your ending? Or would you pick up the pen and start a new chapter with fire? The service door gave way with a low, metallic groan, and I slipped out into the chilled air of early morning Atherton. The estate grounds were still as ever manicured hedges, fountains humming in the distance, security lights casting halos over empty walkways. It looked like peace. But everything here was illusion. And I had learned long ago that the most dangerous traps were the ones wrapped in beauty. I moved fast, ducking low and favoring the shadows. Years of fieldwork had trained my body to function even under chemical stress. The poison was fading, but its echo remained. My fingers tingled, my head pulsed with the distant throb of betrayal. I didn't stop to feel. There wasn't time. The perimeter was lined with wrought iron gates and a discreet security system I'd memorized before I was tall enough to reach the keypad. I slipped through a blind spot near the tennis courts and disappeared into the sleeping streets of Atherton. My escape wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. 10 years ago, I had walked down that same driveway with a duffel bag and a broken heart. Back then, I was a discarded girl with no plan and no protection. This time, I left not as a victim, but as a ghost trained in psychological warfare, surveillance, and extraction. And for the first time since my return, I didn't feel afraid. I felt clear. I stole a car from the long-term parking lot at the country club 3 blocks away. A black Lexus with valet tags and a quarter tank of gas. It would do. I didn't need distance. I needed cover. I drove south toward San Jose, keeping to back roads. No GPS, no cameras. Just instinct and silence. As I drove, pieces of my old life played in my mind like a bitter slideshow. The science fair trophy I won at 14. The one my mother hid behind encyclopedia volumes because it didn't match her decor. The night my father forced me to take the blame for Julian's DUI just to protect his college applications. And the last day, the day they ripped up my birth certificate and told me I didn't belong. I had spent years pretending those moments didn't matter. But they did. They were the roots of this war. I reached a cheap motel in San Jose by sunrise. It smelled like bleach and desperation, but the curtains closed and they took cash. That was enough. I collapsed onto the bed and let the adrenaline drain out of me, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating emptiness. My body was safe. But my name, my identity was under threat. And I needed someone I could trust completely. There was only one name that came to mind: Spectre. So if you had one phone call, one person you could trust with your life, your story, your truth, who would it be? Would they answer? I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the burner phone I'd just purchased at a 24-hour gas station. It was still in its plastic packaging. My fingers hovered over it, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I did. Once I made this call, there would be no turning back. This wasn't a report. This wasn't a favor. This was war. I unwrapped the phone, powered it on, and entered the emergency protocol code I had memorized years ago. A simple word: compromised. No names, no context, just a signal. I sent it to a single recipient. Luca. To the world, Luca was a ghost, an old Cold War relic that refused to vanish. Within the agency, he was a legend. To me, he was the only person who had ever truly seen me, not as a burden, not as a liability, but as someone capable, sharp, dangerous when necessary. He had recruited me straight out of basic and trained me through the darkest months of my life. When I was scraping through intelligence assessments, he brought me tea instead of lectures. When I failed my first hand-to-hand final, he made me fight him instead of punishing me. He didn't break me to rebuild me, he saw what was already broken and taught me how to weaponize it. 10 minutes after the signal was sent, the phone vibrated. No caller ID. I answered immediately. Blake. Situation report. Situation. His voice was calm, flat clinical. I took a breath, pushed back the tremor in my throat, and delivered the words like I was still in the debriefing room. Drugged, detained, attempted termination, suspect's biological family. Method slow-acting neurotoxin at dinner. Currently in safe location. No pursuit yet. There was a pause. Not disbelief. Just calculation. Understood, Luca said. Sanctuary protocol is active. Do not engage. Do not contact additional assets. Find secure ground. I'll handle backend. Then his voice softened not by much, but just enough to remind me he was human. You are not alone. Those 4 words broke something in me. Not my strength, not my focus, but the dam of silence I had built around my heart since the day I left that house. For 12 years I had walked this world carrying the weight of being unwanted. I had succeeded. I had survived. But I had never really felt seen. And in those 4 words, I remembered that I wasn't just fighting to stay alive. I was fighting to reclaim who I was. So I ask you, when someone finally reminds you that you are not alone, after years of silence, what do you do with that second chance? Do you run? Or do you fight? Sleep didn't come easy that night. Even in the silence of the cheap motel room, my mind wouldn't let me rest. The ceiling above me might have been cracked drywall, but in my head I was staring up at the painted crown moldings of the Vance estate. No matter how far I drove, that house followed me like a ghost with perfect posture and cold hands. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, and the past came flooding back not as memories, but as warnings. I was 14 the first time I realized my victories didn't count. Not in that family. It was the day of the state science fair. I had spent 3 months soldering and programming a robotic arm that could mimic fine motor skills. I taught myself code after school, while Julian was out playing tennis. I burned my fingers, skipped parties, stayed up night after night, tweaking voltage ratios and motion curves. And I won. First place. The gold-plated trophy was heavy in my hands and warm with pride. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone back home would be proud too. I walked into the house still in my grease-stained jeans and holding the trophy like a beacon. My mother was arranging lilies in the foyer, and she barely looked up. She took in my wrinkled shirt, the smudges on my face, and her expression tightened like she had stepped into something unpleasant. "Paige," she said, her voice clipped. "You look unkempt." That was it. No question about what I had in my hands. No smile, no warmth. Just disdain. That night there was a celebration dinner at the country club, but not for me. It was for Julian. He'd made varsity tennis. My science trophy didn't even make it into the living room. A week later, I found it tucked away in my father's office, placed behind a row of leather-bound encyclopedias. Out of sight, out of mind. That was when I learned something critical in our family. Julian didn't just get the spotlight. He was the stage. The rest of us were expected to support his performance or disappear quietly into the wings. You might think that's just how some families work. Parents favor the easier child, the golden one. But this wasn't favoritism. This was indoctrination. A system. I wasn't just overlooked. I was erased every time I stepped out of line. Every time I excelled in something they didn't value, they punished me with silence. That science fair should have been the beginning of a dream. Instead, it became the moment I started to dream of escape. So let me ask you, have you ever achieved something you were proud of, only to have it ignored by the people whose praise you craved most. What did you do with that silence? Did it break you, or did it build something stronger inside? I was 15 when the line between unfairness and cruelty became undeniable. It was a cold October night, the air thick with the smell of damp leaves and something acrid burnt rubber. Julian had just turned 16, and with that came the gift of a brand new BMW courtesy of Sterling Vance himself. It was midnight when he decided to test its limits. I was in the passenger seat clutching the door handle while he laughed like the world belonged to him. Until it didn't. He clipped the back end of a Toyota as we sped through a yellow light. The car spun out, bounced once against the curb, and came to a jarring stop in someone's front yard. Julian's first reaction wasn't concern. It was panic, and then denial. The driver of the other car, a young woman, was hurt, but not critically. By the time the paramedics arrived, so had my father. Not 5 minutes had passed. He must have flown out the door the moment Julian called. He barely glanced at the woman. His eyes went straight to me. He pulled me aside away from the flashing lights and said low and forceful, "You'll say you were driving." I blinked. "What, you're a minor?" he said, already rehearsing the lie in his mind. "It'll be a slap on the wrist. Julian's got Stanford, scholarships. This can't touch him." I stood there in the cold streetlight glaring off the hood of that crumpled BMW and realized I wasn't being asked. I was being ordered. My body went rigid. For years I had obeyed, endured, swallowed. But something broke loose in me that night. I looked him in the eye and said one word I had never dared before. No. His face changed. The mask cracked. The calm CEO melted into something darker, colder. His jaw clenched and he grabbed my arm so tight it left bruises for days. "Your stubbornness," he hissed, "will be the ruin of this family." That was the moment I stopped being a daughter and became an adversary. The police arrived minutes later. Julian spun a story about avoiding a deer, and my father shielded him like a secret weapon. No charges were filed, no questions asked. But I noticed the way Sterling watched me after that with suspicion, with a quiet rage. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Back at home, there was no family meeting, no apology. Just silence. My mother didn't mention the accident. She never even asked if I was hurt. Instead, she looked at me one morning and said, "You've become difficult, Paige. Difficult girls don't last long in this family." I didn't respond, because I was already planning my exit. "So tell me, what's the moment that made you stop trying to earn someone's love? Was it quiet, or did it come with sirens in the night?" I was 16 when the final blow came. And no, it wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies would have you believe. It didn't come with shouting in the rain or a slammed door. It came on a Tuesday afternoon with the quiet brutality only family can deliver. Julian was failing his AP English class. Not struggling, failing. His pride wouldn't allow him to ask for help. So instead, he helped himself to the one thing he'd always been entitled to in our home, my work. He broke into my laptop, took an essay I had written for a writing competition, an analysis of Othello so sharp it had already won regional recognition, and submitted it as his own. His teacher recognized my style immediately. The phrasing, the structure, the references, it was mine. She called both of us in. And for one brief moment, I thought justice might actually breathe in the Vance household. Instead, Julian got there first. He told her I had hacked his email, that I was jealous, that I had planted the essay in his submission folder to frame him. The teacher looked torn. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the weight of reputation, the fear of accusing a Vance. She promised to look into it, but it didn't matter, because by the time I got home, the trial had already been held and the verdict delivered. My mother stood in the doorway of my bedroom shaking. Not with sadness, with fury. Her face was pale, her voice trembled, and in her hand she held a piece of paper. My birth certificate. You are a viper in this house. She spat, her voice ragged. You are consumed with envy for your brother. Then she tore it. Right in front of me. The sound was so sharp, so sudden that for a second I thought it was thunder. But it was just paper. Just two halves of a document that had once meant I belonged to someone. It fluttered to the carpet like dead leaves, and standing behind her, silent as ever, was my father. He didn't speak. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. His presence was his consent. She screamed. He nodded. And I broke. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, my student ID, and the last $50 I had stashed in an old envelope under my mattress. No one stopped me. No one asked where I would go. The only sound in that house was the faint chime of the grandfather clock as I stepped onto the marble floor one last time. That night, I stopped being their daughter. I became a ghost. So let me ask you, have you ever watched someone tear up proof that you exist? Have you ever walked out of a house not because you wanted to leave, but because staying meant losing yourself completely? Atherton disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror of a bus I couldn't afford, headed south toward Los Angeles. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a destination. I had a duffel bag, a bruised arm, and the echo of my mother's voice still ringing in my ears. But for the first time in my life, I had something that resembled freedom. Cold, dangerous, unforgiving freedom, but freedom nonetheless. I slept the first few nights on a bench in MacArthur Park, wrapped in a borrowed hoodie that smelled like mildew and cigarettes. No one looked at me. No one cared why a 16-year-old girl with expensive shoes and hollow eyes was curled up beside a duck pond. I learned quickly that the world doesn't care where you came from, only whether you're a threat or a target. And I didn't look like either. I looked invisible. That kept me alive. Hunger came next. The kind of hunger that makes your joints ache and your vision pulse. I remember staring at a moldy loaf of bread in a corner store, weighing risk versus necessity. I didn't steal it. I just walked away. Even then, something inside me clung to pride like a splinter under the skin, but pride doesn't fill your stomach. So, I worked. Anything that paid in cash. I washed dishes in a cramped kitchen at a family-run Mexican restaurant in Boyle Heights. The grease never left my hands, no matter how much I scrubbed. I mopped floors in a film studio in Burbank, cleaning the echoes of other people's dreams while I tried not to choke on the stench of bleach and forgotten stardom. My fingers bled, my back ached, but I survived. Not because I was tough, but because no one gave me another option. One night after closing shift, I wandered out of the studio lobby and looked up at the flat-screen TV mounted to the ceiling. There she was, Eleanor Vance, dressed in a floor-length gown, holding a microphone at some charity gala. Her voice rang with confidence, purity, purpose. "We must support children who have no homes," she declared with a perfect tear shimmering in her eye. The screen said she had just donated $2 million to an international orphan relief fund. I stood there soaked in mop water, watching her image glow above me like a false god. And I felt it, not rage, not sorrow, but humiliation, deep acidic shame that burned down into my bones. She wasn't just surviving without me. She had erased me, glossed over me like a smear on a mirror. I didn't just not matter, I had never existed. And still I endured. So let me ask you, what's worse, being hated by someone who should have loved you, or realizing they forgot you even existed? Which cuts deeper? Which do you carry longer? The night everything changed came wrapped in rain. Not the kind that taps gently on the roof and soothes you to sleep. No. This rain lashed sideways wind howling through the alleys of downtown LA like a wounded animal. I was soaked through within minutes, shoes squishing with each step as I huddled under the flimsy awning of a closed liquor store. I had 32 cents in my pocket and a bag of damp clothes slung over my shoulder. My stomach ached. My legs trembled. I remember thinking, this is it. I could lie down right here and let it all fade. And no one would know. No one would care. Then I heard a voice. Low, rough like gravel and smoke. "You look like a fighter." I turned, standing in the rain holding a battered black umbrella and a steaming cup of soup in a white styrofoam cup, was a man built like a retired tank. His clothes were plain, his face weathered, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't offer pity. He didn't ask what had happened. He just extended the soup toward me like an offering. "You just haven't found your war yet," he said. I don't know why I took it. Pride should have stopped me. But something in his voice cut through the noise in my head. I held the cup in both hands like it was fire. The heat traveled up my arms into my chest, into the cracks that had nearly broken wide open. We didn't talk much. He didn't ask for my name, but when I followed him to the alley beside his gym, he pointed to a cot behind the lockers and said, "Dry off. You've got 2 days. After that you train or you leave." I trained. I ran laps until my lungs burned. I hit bags until my knuckles split. I lifted until my arms refused to move. And slowly, day by day, the pieces of me that had been scattered across Atherton and Burbank and that rain-slick sidewalk began to form something new. Something solid. 2 weeks later, I walked into a military recruitment office with nothing but my ID and a stare that could split concrete. I didn't want a job. I wanted discipline. Purpose. A name that meant something when spoken aloud. The military gave me all of that, but it also gave me something I hadn't expected: visibility. My aptitude scores lit up their systems. My endurance set records. My refusal to quit no matter the obstacle earned me one recommendation. Just one. But that's all it took. The CIA came calling. So let me ask you, when life pushes you so far into a corner that there's no room left to stand, do you surrender? Or do you sharpen yourself into something they'll regret ever underestimating? I didn't sleep after the call with Luca. I couldn't. The adrenaline had drained, but my mind was spinning like a high-caliber round loaded into a chamber. I had spent years disappearing into other people's shadows, moving silently through alleys in Caracas souks in Marrakesh and backdoor briefings in Panama. But this was personal. This wasn't about foreign enemies. This was about blood. My blood. And they had tried to spill it. The burner phone buzzed again an hour later. A secure encrypted message. No greeting. No sentiment. Just 5 words: sanctuary protocol. Identity package incoming. Attached was a new name, a fresh passport already in motion, digital banking credentials, and most importantly, a list. A list of vetted civilian assets stationed on the West Coast, people who owed favors, people who didn't ask questions, people who could disappear the right kind of problems. I scanned the names, my eyes stopping on the first: Anna Sharma. A high-powered attorney in San Francisco with a reputation for tearing through corporate empires like a buzzsaw. She didn't blink at billion-dollar intimidation tactics, and she had one specialty: weaponizing paperwork. I had met her once briefly in a secured briefing when the agency used her to extract an asset from a hostile boardroom in Dubai. She was smart, cold, surgical, and most importantly, incorruptible. I sent her a coded request to meet under the guise of a corporate legal inquiry. She responded in 6 minutes. Come alone. 9:00 a.m. sharp. 44th floor, Transbay Tower. That was it. By sunrise, I had showered, dressed in black slacks, a plain blouse, and tinted glasses. No makeup. Hair tied back. I looked like a tired executive, the kind people don't notice in elevators. I walked into that skyscraper carrying nothing but a flash drive and the weight of an entire family's sins. Anna's office was glass and steel, cold and pristine. She didn't stand when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from her with 2 fingers. "You're Paige Blake," she said, not asking. "Or whatever name you're using today." I nodded once. "You've been briefed. I was told you'd have evidence. Something actionable. Not emotional. I do." I slid the drive across the table. She plugged it in without hesitation. As the documents loaded audio files, photos of the wine cellar timestamps from the crash site bank transactions, I watched her face closely. Nothing. Not a twitch, not a flinch. When it finished, she removed the drive, locked it in a secure drawer, and looked at me. "They believe you're dead," she said. "That gives us the element of surprise. And we're not going after them for emotional trauma. That's weak. That's what they'd expect." Her eyes sharpened. "We're going to dismantle them. Legally, financially, publicly. We'll turn their empire to ash and sell the remains. So, tell me, if you had a chance to bring justice to those who tried to erase you, would you take the high road? Or would you walk through the fire they lit and burn them with it?" Anna didn't waste time with pleasantries. The moment I left her office, she activated a legal team of 5 junior associates, young, ruthless, and hungry. They didn't wear power suits or speak in platitudes. They worked in silence, eyes glued to screens, fingers flying across keyboards like surgeons. By nightfall, they had cracked into the Vance family trust documents. What they found wasn't just disturbing, it was strategic. There had been an original trust dated 12 years ago. It listed me, Paige Vance, as a 1/3 beneficiary of the family estate. Equal to Julian, equal to the Golden Boy. But 6 months ago, my name had quietly disappeared. In its place, Julian now controlled 100% of the trust. The change had been notarized, filed, and buried deep in offshore holdings. No legal notification, no formal renunciation, just a surgical deletion. But the timing, that's what made my blood run cold. The amendment had been filed precisely 3 weeks before Vance Defense publicly announced their record-breaking $5 billion arms contract with a foreign government notorious for human rights violations. A clause in that contract required total familial stability among board executives, no pending lawsuits, no inheritance disputes, no domestic drama. In other words, I had become a threat to profit, and threats had to be neutralized. Anna slid a printout of the clause across the table when I returned the next day. Her voice was quiet, but cutting. "They didn't just disown you, Paige. They liquidated you. You were a liability they had to erase to close the deal." I stared at the language on the page, sterile corporate, devoid of emotion. It didn't say my name, but it explained everything. They sold me. I remember staring at the contract, feeling something inside me shift, not crack, not collapse. Just reconfigure. Like a bone that had been set wrong for years, suddenly snapping back into place. Everything they had ever told me about family, about loyalty, about duty, it was all transactional. And now, so was my response. Anna leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "We start with fraud," she said, "followed by conspiracy to commit attempted murder and obstruction of legal inheritance. But we're going to need more than documents. We need a smoking gun, a mistake, a body they didn't bury deep enough." I nodded slowly. "I know someone who might be that body." She raised an eyebrow. "A witness." "Not exactly," I said, standing. "He's supposed to be dead. But I think he's still breathing. And if he is, he has what we need." She didn't ask for a name. She didn't need to. "Find him," she said. "Then we build the fire. So let me ask you, what would you do if you learned your own blood put a $sign on your life? Would you let it go? Or would you follow the money until it led you straight to the grave they dug for you?" His name was Marcus Thorne, former lead auditor at Vance Defense. By all official accounts, he died in a single vehicle accident 5 years ago on a foggy road in Oregon. Case closed. File sealed. But there had always been something about that death that didn't sit right with me even back then, before I had the training to decode corporate cover-ups. He had found something big buried in the defense budgets. And then, just like that, gone. No funeral, no obituary, just silence. Now that silence felt strategic, I dug into the list Luca had sent me: satellite pings, internal memos, whispers, and classified corners of the agency. And there it was, a weak signal from a remote wooded area outside Bend, Oregon. A property purchased under a shell corporation, solar-powered. No cell tower nearby. It fit the profile. I rented a car, paid in cash, and drove all night through the Pacific Northwest, the trees pressing close on either side like sentinels guarding secrets. By sunrise, I found it. A small log cabin tucked so deep into the forest you'd miss it unless you were looking for ghosts. Smoke curled from a chimney. No movement inside. I parked half a mile away and approached through the woods, staying low, letting my training guide each step. No birdsong. Just the soft crunch of pine needles and the distant creak of wood against wind. I saw him before he saw me. Marcus was out back chopping wood with a small axe. His beard was thick, his clothes worn, but the posture was unmistakable, ex-military, paranoid, and armed. A pistol hung from his hip. He moved like a man who expected death to come knocking. I waited until he was mid-swing, then stepped out from the trees. Marcus Thorne. I said, my voice even low. I'm not with Vance. He spun around in an instant, gun drawn, eyes wild. Who sent you? I raised my hands slowly. Name's Paige. Paige Blake. Vance tried to kill me last week. I think they tried to kill you 5 years ago. His eyes narrowed. The gun didn't lower, but it wavered. Inside the cabin, he let me speak. I told him about the wine, the cellar, the forged trust, the contract clause. Every word etched deeper into his already brittle exterior. When I finished, he went to a footlocker at the back of the room. Pulled out a recorder, the old kind scuffed from use. I planted this the day before they tried to kill me. He said, voice shaking but steady. Sterling thought he was being clever. But the room was hot. He pressed play. And there it was. My mother's voice. The girl is the last loose end. Eliminate the liability. Everything will be buried. So tell me, if you found the one piece of truth they never meant for you to hear, the one that could burn it all down, would you use it? Or would you hold on to it just to remember you weren't crazy? I left Marcus's cabin with more than just a recording. I left with fire. Proof. Not conjecture, not motive, not suspicion. Her voice. My mother's cold, deliberate tone plotting my erasure like a quarterly loss. No emotion, no hesitation. Just eliminate the liability. That line echoed in my ears as I drove back down the winding road, replaying over and over like a war drum. I wasn't just a mistake to them. I was a risk they could no longer afford. Back in San Jose, I reconnected with Anna. When she heard the clip, she didn't flinch. But her voice, always calm, dropped half an octave. That's the first nail in the coffin, she said. Now we make it airtight. But to do that, we needed one more thing: a breach. Someone on the inside. That's when I thought of her, Chloe Mercer. She was a mid-level archivist buried in Vance's legal compliance division. On paper, she was nobody. But her father. He used to be one of Vance's top engineers. Brilliant. Precise. Until he raised concerns about a guidance flaw in one of their missile systems. Shortly after, he was discredited, demoted, and found dead from a sudden heart attack. The story was clean. Too clean. Her name had stayed buried in a folder in my memory until now. I had no proof she knew anything, but I had a feeling. From a burner device, I sent a single sentence to her company-issued phone, routed through multiple encryption layers. They lied about your father's death, and they're lying about much more. That was it. No signature, no threat. Just a match tossed near gasoline. For 12 hours, nothing. No response, no trace. Then, in the early hours of the morning, my burner lit up. A secure message. No subject. Just 2 words: I believe you. Attached were 2 files. The first was a sealed legal document: Julian's arrest record in Mexico. He'd been caught with narcotics and underage girls in a villa tied to an arms deal party. Vance Legal had it sealed, scrubbed, and paid to vanish. The second file was a scanned image of the original Vance family trust, unaltered, uncensored, with my name still on it. She'd found both, and sent them without hesitation. It was a risk, a massive one. If she was caught, she'd be buried next. But some people, when pushed far enough, don't care about the fall, they care about hitting something on the way down. I stared at the files, jaw-tight, heart pounding. This wasn't just leverage. This was an arsenal. And with Anna on one side, Marcus on the other, and Chloe inside the belly of the beast, I was no longer outnumbered. I was outflanking. So tell me, when someone finally opens a door for you from the inside, when they risk everything to let the truth breathe, do you hesitate? Or do you step through and blow the whole house down? The files Chloe sent weren't just damning, they were detonations. But I knew what came next. They'd realize something was wrong. The lie was unraveling, and people like Sterling didn't wait around to see how far the thread could pull. I had to move first. That night, I used my agency credentials, ones I wasn't technically supposed to have anymore, and tunneled into the CIA's mission log servers. I needed one thing: proof of my Panama assignment, my alibi. If I could show I had been overseas the night of the staged accident, it would blow their story apart in any courtroom. I entered my access codes, waited for the records to populate, and then froze. Access denied. Data not found. That couldn't be right. I tried again, different route, different encryption, same result. The entire operational file from that week gone. Not redacted, scrubbed. Every checkpoint. Every mission log. Every field report. Erased like I'd never served. I stared at the screen as a hollow chill crept through my spine. This wasn't a glitch. This was a surgical deletion. My heart slammed against my ribs. I picked up the burner and called the only person who could tell me what the hell just happened. Luca answered on the first ring. "Blake?" he asked, voice already strained. "I can't access my Panama logs. The whole file's gone." He was silent for a second too long. When he spoke again, his tone was different, lower, colder. "It wasn't deleted from inside Langley," he said. "It was routed through a classified back channel linked to Vance Defense. That stopped me cold." "What, there's a server," he said, deep back end. "Almost no one knows it exists. But the signature on the delete order. It came through Vance. Blake, your father has reach. Deep reach." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. My father hadn't just sold weapons, he had infiltrated the very agency I had bled for. He had reached into the one sanctuary I had left and poisoned it. My service record, my protection, my proof, gone. And with it, any chance of the agency shielding me if things escalated. Luca spoke again, his voice harder now. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is national security. They used the CIA to cover up a domestic crime. That makes them more than corrupt. That makes them dangerous." He was right. I hung up and stared into the cheap motel mirror. The woman looking back wasn't Paige Blake, CIA operative. She wasn't Paige Vance, daughter of a legacy. She was something else now. Something forged. They thought they could erase me with wine and paperwork. But they'd forgotten who they trained. So tell me, if the people who made you turn on you, if they reached into the very foundation you built yourself upon and tried to wipe it clean, would you retreat? Or would you rebuild yourself from the ashes and strike with everything they taught you? The time for defense was over. They had scrubbed my identity, attempted to erase my legacy, and turned the agency I served into their personal firewall. I wasn't just a daughter they tried to silence, I was now a threat they couldn't contain. And threats like me don't run. We infiltrate. We dismantle. We expose. The motel bathroom mirror was cracked, but the reflection it gave me was clear. This wasn't about reclaiming a place at their table. That table was built on rot. I didn't want a seat. I wanted to burn the blueprints. I called Luca one last time, voice steady. "I need an identity pull," I said. Off the books. A name, Marcus Thorne. Last known alias, location, anything you can find. There was no hesitation. Luca knew. They brought this war to our doorstep. Now we were bringing it home. 6 hours later, a message appeared. Coordinates, alias, subject alive. Extreme caution advised. Paranoid and armed. Of course he was. He'd faked his death and vanished. I would have done the same. But I needed him alive, and I needed him willing. He had the last piece. Not just of my puzzle, but of theirs. I drove through the night in a stolen sedan, the miles blurring into silence. Bend, Oregon, remote, wooded, cold. Perfect for a man trying to stay buried. I parked half a mile from the location Luca provided and hiked through a trail that barely qualified as one. The air was clean but heavy with pine and damp soil. The cabin emerged like a relic log wall smoke from a small chimney, solar panels rigged against the slope. I watched for hours before moving. Pattern recognition, surveillance, same routine every day. Wood chopped at dawn, short patrol around the perimeter. Armed. Always armed. Finally, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and he turned his back to the woods, I stepped out. Marcus Thorne, I said, calm but clear. I'm not with Vance. He turned faster than I expected. Gun up, safety off. His hands didn't shake, but his eyes did. Who are you? I raised both hands slowly. Paige Blake. They tried to kill me last week. That name stopped him. Not because it meant something, but because he recognized what it represented, another ghost. Another loose end they thought they'd tied off. His eyes narrowed. Then after a long pause, he jerked his head toward the door. Inside. Now. The cabin was what you'd expect from a man living in exile, survivalist paranoid, every surface covered in maps, notes, wires, printouts. He moved like someone who had lived 10 years waiting for a knock on the door. I told him everything. The wine, the cellar, the trust, the voice recordings, Chloe's intel, the erased CIA file, and when I finished, he reached under the floorboards and pulled out a small metal recorder. I planted this in Sterling's private conference room, the day before they tried to kill me. He pressed play, and I heard it. Eleanor's voice. The girl is the last loose end. Eliminate the liability. Everything will be buried. So let me ask you, if your enemy handed you the bullet, would you hesitate to load it? Or would you look them in the eye and pull the trigger they thought you'd never dare touch? I didn't speak for a long time after the recording ended. There was no need. The weight of those words, my mother's voice ordering my erasure, had already settled deep into the room like smoke after a detonation. Marcus stared at the floor, the old recorder still in his hand like it might burn through his skin. I've played that 100 times, he said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm more haunted by her calm than by what she said. I understood. Eleanor didn't speak in threats. She didn't scream or rage. She planned. She delegated. And she executed with precision. To her, removing me wasn't an act of hate, it was a matter of logistics. I took the recorder, sealed it in a double-layered evidence pouch, and looked Marcus in the eye. You don't have to hide anymore, I said. But I need you to stand beside me. In court. On the record. He hesitated. Not out of fear, out of fatigue. I've been a ghost for 5 years, he said. You think anyone will believe me now I didn't blink? They won't need to believe you. They'll hear her. They'll hear him. Because in the second half of that recording, Sterling's voice came in discussing how to bury Julian's arrest in Mexico. The girls, the narcotics, the bribes, the falsified diplomatic coverage. It was all their conspiracy, obstruction, money laundering, and the rot at the center of the Vance empire laid bare in cold, calculated conversation. Marcus looked at me, and in that moment, something hardened in his posture. Not defiance, not rage, just resolve. All right, he said. Let's burn it down. Back in San Jose, I sent the files to Anna over a secure channel. Her reply came in one line. It's time. She filed for an emergency hearing in San Mateo County, petitioning for immediate review of the Vance family trust accompanied by criminal evidence tied directly to fraud and attempted murder. And to make sure no one shut it down behind closed doors, she leaked the existence of the motion to 2 major investigative journalists. Not the recordings, just the fact that there were recordings. Within 24 hours, news vans were circling the courthouse. By the time we walked through the courthouse doors, the place was packed. Press in the back, lawyers on the walls. Old money from Atherton sitting stiff in their designer coats like royalty, waiting to see a peasant behead themselves in public. They didn't know I was holding the blade. Across the room I saw them. Eleanor in winter white, Sterling in navy. Julian bored and scrolling through his phone like none of this mattered. They looked confident. Like this was all just another inconvenience in a long life of untouchables. They still thought I was the same girl who left with a duffel bag and no voice. So let me ask you, if the people who erased you stood smugly in front of a crowd, convinced they'd buried the truth forever, would you give them one more warning? Or would you let the whole world watch them crumble? The moment Judge Marion Shaw entered the courtroom, a hush fell like a curtain. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her late 60s, known for running a courtroom with the precision of a scalpel. She didn't tolerate theatrics. She didn't care for legacy. She cared for truth. And today, truth was about to roar. Anna Sharma stood her presence calm and deliberate and began with no introduction, no preamble. Your Honor, the defense claims that my client Paige Blake staged her own disappearance in a fit of emotional instability. They argue she was not in danger, not harmed, and not entitled to the trust fund originally assigned to her. But today, we will present evidence that not only proves a targeted attempt on her life by her biological family, but a multi-tier conspiracy involving inheritance fraud, attempted murder, and national security compromise. That got their attention. Across the aisle, Daloqua, the Vance family's high-priced legal predator, stood up like he was swatting a fly. Your Honor, this is absurd. This is a desperate attempt from an unstable woman seeking attention and a payday. We request immediate dismissal. Judge Shaw didn't flinch. You'll sit down, Mr. Daloqua, and you'll do it quietly. Ms. Sharma may proceed. Anna nodded once and pressed a key on her laptop. A large screen behind the judge lit up. Exhibit A, she said. This is a partially declassified operations log from the Central Intelligence Agency confirming Ms. Blake's presence in Panama on the exact night she allegedly staged a car crash in Atherton. The document appeared heavily redacted, but the timestamp and name were visible. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A side door opened. A man in a government-issue suit entered and walked straight to the bench. He introduced himself as a representative from the CIA's Office of Inspector General and authenticated the document in front of the entire room. The Vance family didn't move, but I saw the flicker of concern in Sterling's eyes, the tightening of Eleanor's jaw. Then came the hammer. Anna clicked again. Exhibit B, she said, her voice razor sharp. Audio evidence recovered from a recording device planted inside Sterling Vance's private conference room. She pressed play. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. Put the hair clip in the glove box. It's a personal touch. No blood, no trauma. It'll look like a minor accident. We'll say the girl panicked and ran. The gallery erupted. Journalists scribbled furiously. Members of high society turned to each other in stunned silence. Eleanor, always composed, always in control, finally broke. Her lips parted just slightly. Her expression cracked. Daloqua leapt to his feet. Objection. That recording is inadmissible, obtained illegally. Judge Shaw didn't even let him finish. Overruled. This is a preliminary hearing, not a jury trial. And I will hear it. Sit down. Anna turned slowly, her voice now low but powerful. Your Honor, we now call our next witness to the stand. Mr. Marcus Thorne. The doors opened again, and the man they thought was dead walked into the room. So let me ask you, if your enemies thought they'd buried every piece of evidence, how would you like them to meet the proof they missed? In secret, or in front of everyone they ever tried to impress? Marcus Thorne didn't walk into that courtroom like a man afraid. He walked like someone who had been preparing for this moment every single day of the 5 years he'd been presumed dead. His suit was clean, but dated. His hair grayer. But his presence, it hit like a thunderclap. And when Sterling saw him, the color drained from his face. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. For once, the titan of Vance's defense had nothing to say. Marcus took the stand, sworn in, looked straight ahead, then straight at Sterling. "Hello, Sterling," he said, his voice clear and steady. "It's been a while. You could have heard a pin drop." Anna stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne, can you state your role at Vance's defense prior to your disappearance?" "I was the lead auditor." "For 9 years. And what did you discover during your final months?" He didn't blink. "A multi-$100 million slush fund, used to bribe foreign officials and cover up catastrophic weapon test failures. When I attempted to report it, I was marked. They killed a homeless man, planted my ID, and staged a car crash. I've been hiding ever since." Murmurs swept through the gallery like wildfire. Anna gave him a moment, then continued. "And do you have proof?" He nodded, reached into his bag, and pulled out a folder, handwritten notes, financial records, account transfers, offshore accounts. He recited names, dates, places. The corruption wasn't just deep, it was systemic. It implicated board members, international liaisons, and several executive deals directly tied to Sterling's signature. He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He just told the truth like a surgeon exposing rot beneath polished skin. When he finished, Anna turned to the judge. "Your Honor, between the audio, the CIA confirmation, and this testimony, we believe there is more than sufficient cause to launch a full criminal investigation into Sterling Vance Eleanor. Vance and Julian Vance." Judge Shaw didn't hesitate. Her voice rang out like the crack of a gavel even before she raised it. "This court finds probable cause for immediate investigation into all named parties on charges including, but not limited to, inheritance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and misuse of federal defense infrastructure. Effective immediately, this hearing is concluded." Then came the gavel. One sharp, clean strike. Across the aisle, I looked at Eleanor. Her mouth was open, but no words came. Julian looked like he wanted to vanish into the leather of his chair. And Sterling, he just sat there staring at the floor like the CEO of an empire that had just collapsed beneath him. Because that's exactly what had happened. And I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. So let me ask you, when justice finally arrives, not as a whisper but as a thunderclap before a crowd, would you look your betrayers in the eye? Or would you let the silence speak louder than anything you could ever say? The courtroom fallout was immediate. Within hours, Vance's defense stock crashed. The Pentagon issued a formal suspension of all existing contracts. Media outlets ran headlines faster than Sterling's PR team could draft statements. And the public, they weren't shocked. They were furious. The mask of respectability that the Vances had worn for decades had finally slipped, and underneath the face was rotten. But for me, the reckoning wasn't over. There were 3 faces I still had to see one more time. Not for closure, not for vengeance. Just so they would know I hadn't just survived, I had become everything they feared. Julian was first. He was already in a federal holding facility when I visited. Gone was the golden aura, the tailored suits, the smug smile. He sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit that didn't fit and eyes that couldn't meet mine. "Paige," he whispered through the glass. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. Not with hate, just truth. "No, Julian. You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught. You never saw me as family. Just a problem you needed Daddy to fix." He opened his mouth to speak, but I stood before he could. Goodbye, Julian. Enjoy the silence. And I walked away, leaving him to his 25 years, and the knowledge that his fall wasn't authored by strangers, but by the sister he discarded. Sterling came next. He was recovering from a minor stroke in a long-term care facility overlooking the Pacific. I found him in a wheelchair by a window, staring blankly at the ocean like he still owned it. He didn't turn when I entered, didn't acknowledge me. On the table beside him, I placed something small and familiar, his old brass Zippo lighter. He used to carry it everywhere, said it was reliable no matter the weather. You had a choice, I said softly, more to myself than to him. You could have been a father, but you chose to be a CEO. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared out into a world that no longer bowed at his feet. His silence used to be a weapon. Now it was just empty. I walked out without waiting for him to break it. The last was Eleanor. She was under house arrest, confined to the Atherton estate, the same mausoleum where my identity had once been torn in two. The house was cold, quiet, hollow. She stood in the foyer when I entered, her expression brittle, her pride hanging on by threads. You, she spat venom on her tongue. You've ruined everything. No, I replied. I'm not the curse. I'm the consequence. She stepped forward, trembling with rage. You were always poison. I met her eyes. No. You taught me that love is weakness, that survival is earned. And I learned the lesson better than you ever imagined. I stepped back, voice calm. So thank you, Eleanor, for the education. Then I left her screams trailing behind me like smoke from a dying fire. So tell me, when you finally face the people who tried to destroy you, would you scream fight rage? Or would you stand there in complete silence and let them see the one thing they never expected: your peace? The war was over. I had justice not in fire or fury, but in truth laid bare for all to see. They tried to erase me, but I stood taller than their silence. If you're listening to this and you've ever been cast aside, betrayed by the very people meant to protect you, let me say this: your worth isn't defined by those who refuse to see it. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Sometimes survival is the loudest revenge. Have you ever faced a betrayal like mine? What did you do? How did you rise again? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. If this touched something in you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your voice matters. And thank you for listening.